Yes, so much yes. I even went down there. We're live. It's 11:30. This is your morning wake up call or morning motivation, project motivation. So get your project done. It's still officially morning here in sunny California, 11:30 in the morning. But today we're going to talk about nitrous setup. So we're going to talk about them in relation to things like camshafts and stuff. So, and we'll start off with something easy. We're going to get into the tune port stuff in just a minute, but we'll start off with something easy. So the question is, can we run? We'll kind of skip to the end here. Can we run nitrous with anything? The answer is almost always yes. I haven't run across a situation where we haven't. So we take like a Brian Tooley Racing, for instance, and on an LS, take a Brian Tooley Truck Norris cam. Can we run nitrous with that? Yes. Can we run it with a stock cam? Yes. Can we run it with the stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, stage 4 truck cams, BTRs, or the other people's, everybody else's basically? Yes, you can run it with all those. The nice thing about that is if we look at it on the LS stuff, and then we'll get specifically to the tune port stuff. But if we look at the LS stuff, for instance, when I did a discussion earlier or a few days ago on the different cams from Brian Tooley Racing. So we did a stock one, the L33, we did a Truck Norris, a hot rod, and a red hot cam. So we just showed the successive marches in the cam. They made more peak power, lost low speed power, made the same torque. But the question is, which one of those would be best to run nitrous with? And the answer is they all work with nitrous. There isn't a best cam for that scenario any more than there's a best cam for a turbo. It's all going to be subjective. The one thing I will say about this is when you're running nitrous and if you're trying to make a lot of power, what I like to do is, and this is something I don't recommend on the turbo stuff. So when I tell you you're doing a turbo LS, put the Brian Tooley Racing Truck Norris cam in, put a turbo on, it spools up better because it makes more low speed power. The turbo is just happier in the lower part of the curve. And then if you want more power, you just turn the boost up. That's a really simple thing. So Truck Norris cam and a 5.3 and a turbo, and away you go. When you're doing nitrous, you don't really have the same thing. So if you start with something like on an LS, start with a Truck Norris cam, and then add nitrous to it, you're going to take a, in the 5.3, I think we made 425 or something. And then you're going to add nitrous to that. So if you had 100 horsepower, it'll go from 425 to 525. If you have 200, it'll add another 100, and 300, add another 100. The problem is there's a limit to how much you can gain. It's really nice, rather than putting a bigger cam in, I'm just going to add another 50 shot of nitrous. You can do that, and that works. The problem is, unlike the turbo stuff, you have a limit to how much of a gain you can get, because the gain that you can get from nitrous is relative to the amount of naturally aspirated power. Because as we've seen in our testing, when we add nitrous to something, it displaces the airflow. So when you add nitrous and you gain power, the airflow actually comes down. It's counterintuitive, but that's what happens. And eventually gets to the point where it just won't process anymore. So the thing that I recommend on the nitrous thing is, like we were looking at our different stages of those Brian Tooley cams, I would put a bigger cam in with a nitrous one, because you're trying to make more NA power, which does two things. You start out at a higher level. And then, so if you start out, instead of at 425, if you started out at 450 or 475 or 500, then you add 100 to that. And now you're at 600 with just 100 shot. So if you start out with more NA power, that's how it works. And then you add more. And then as a second benefit, when you have more NA power, you can add more nitrous before you start running into a situation where it will not process more. So it's a win-win combination. You're making more NA. You'll add, when you add the 100 horsepower or whatever you're going to add, you'll end up making more, and you can add more because you have more NA power to play with, and therefore it will ingest more nitrous. So that works. And it works with all of the different cams. When you get up to the very, very high levels of stuff, then you can start talking about, I need a specific cam to help me process more nitrous. And then that's a discussion for the 2 or 3% of the people that are doing it. You're running multiple kits, 2, 3, 4, 5 kits, whatever you want to run. And then you have to have specific things for that. But the most important part of that element is still not the camshaft. The most important part of that element, when you're adding a whole bunch of kits of nitrous, is that you have a really big, super powerful NA motor to start out with, and big ports and everything, so that you don't displace all that airflow. So that's that. So now let's talk about we'll get specifically on the, and that works, by the way. We talked about LS specific stuff because I have a bunch of data on that, but I have lots of data on every other motor too. So we have big block stuff and small block stuff and big block forward and small block forward, because almost every time I run some kind of motor on the dyno, we add nitrous to it, just because it's easy to do. And we have everything right there. We have some sort of plate kit if it's carbureted, or a carbureted style manifold. We have a wet fogger setup like I'm showing in the thumbnail for the tune port stuff. We have that, so we can just add that really quickly to almost any EFI kit. So adding a quick 100 shot or 125 or 75 or whatever it is we want to add is really easy with nitrous. And so we do that just so that I have more data, and so that I can tell you fine folks that, hey, when you add nitrous to something, it adds power. We've added that to B series and D series Hondas all the way up. So now we can talk about the tune port setup. So on the tune port setup, what we have is essentially a stock or very mild tune port 350. It's an L98. Yeah, an L98. It's a motor that the guys from West Tech had. They got it from the guys at the Chevy race shop because they grabbed a whole bunch of them. Let's see. Zax 33 NOS. So we'll take a look at this here. So the question is, can you run nitrous with a tune port setup? And the answer is definitely yes. As I've shown in that photo, we can see that it's a tune port L98. Is this one the aluminum head? No, this is an iron-headed one. So, but we did run it with this, and this was an iron-headed one because it was an 85 or 86. I can't remember which year it was. But this thing made about 350 horsepower NA. And then, as you can imagine, when we added our nitrous to it, guess what it did? If we had 100 horsepower, it picked up 100 horsepower, because that's what they do. I mean, if you take a look, you guys won't be able to see it, but so this thing made, yeah, not quite 350. So 330 or so horsepower and 400 and something foot-pounds of torque. And then when we added, it looks like we added a 75 shot. So it went up from 330 to 400 horsepower. And then went from a little over 400 foot-pounds up over 500 foot-pounds. Because we're at, the thing that you have to think about is, but what, Richard, why did it add more than 100 foot-pounds of torque? Well, that's because we're adding the nitrous below where horsepower and torque cross over at 5252 because of our formula. And so if you add, and nitrous is adding horsepower. So if you add 75 horsepower at 5252, you're going to get 75 foot-pounds of torque. If you add 75 horsepower above that, you're going to get less torque. If you add 75 horsepower with the nitrous below that, like we did we engaged this thing down at 3,500 RPM. If you add it down below that and you add 75 horsepower at, let's say, 4,000 RPM, then you get a much bigger gain in torque relative to the horsepower. It feels really good, and it enhances what is already, pretty impressive torque, a torque curve on a tune port motor, because having the nitrous, we've got a tune port motor, long runners, mild camshaft, everything about it is designed to make power at a fairly low engine speed. And this thing did. It made peak power at 46 or 4,700, made peak torque at 3,500. That's doing what a tune port does. And when we add the nitrous, wherever you add it, it just adds to whatever's there. So, and as I said, relative to what RPM you're adding, it is going to determine how much of a torque gain you get on the tune port stuff. So can you add it with a tune port setup? Yes, you can. We added it on the inlet elbow in front of the throttle body going into the common plenum, and guys had been selling tune port kits for years. They sold little plates that bolted back behind, sandwiched between the throttle body and the plenum. They got elaborate and did individual fogger setups in the tune port stuff, which looks really sexy. I don't know that most of these tune port setups really need, even if you went down to the smallest jetting, which we normally run would be like 25 horsepower per cylinder, That's still a lot. that's still 200 horsepower on a motor that's only making 330 or whatever. So, you know, whether or not you're going to be able to use that effectively is another thing, because we talked about there's a limit to how much nitrous it will process. So unless you're doing a tune port setup on a much more powerful motor, probably don't need that individual port fogger, although the distribution would be good. And we need to talk about that, because that would be also one of the limitations of running nitrous the way that we did it, with a single fogger, where we're combining nitrous and fuel together into a single fogger, and we're spraying it into the common plenum past the throttle body. And spraying it past the throttle body is because of the center divider, unless you have one of those the little flow deals, the airfoil deals that TPIS sold. I'm sure they sold 1 million of those, because that's such a great invention. They sold a ton of those, so to keep all the nitrous and fuel in there. But the problem is, even once it gets past the throttle body, if you're spraying the nitrous and fuel in there, it still has to make its way through a fairly torturous path through all of the, into the plenum, into whatever cylinder happens to be firing. So it has to go all the way down the long runner and loop around, go into the cross ram setup and go in there. I didn't ever do any, I wish I would have. I didn't ever do any distribution tests on a tune port setup with nitrous, but we only ever ran like 100 or 125 shots. We did 7,500 and 125 shots on those, and it worked, and we called it a day. I didn't ever go up big on those, partly because what we were talking about, if you were to add 100 shot at 400 or 4,000 RPM, you get a really, really big jump in torque. And so we're already pushing, with the simple shot on basically stock motor, we're already pushing over 500 foot-pounds. So it's pretty easy to make really, really big torque numbers, and then the problems that become associated with that sort of cylinder pressure, and with nitrous itself, which has a fairly spiky cylinder pressure curve. I'm going to get to see, when I was talking to Brian Tooley, he said that they have some in-cylinder pressure transducers that they're going to be including in their dyno testing. So I told him I was excited about that, and being able to see all of these pressure traces, because a lot of people have misconceptions about what the pressure events look like in a combustion chamber. So we'll hopefully, going forward, we'll be able to show you some of that stuff, and it'll be very, very cool. But for the record, the nitrous, as we've talked about, when you add 100 shot to something, it adds 100. The only way you might not get away with that is if you add 100 shot to something that's only making 100 horsepower. That can be problematic. Although we've done that to B series Hondas, part of the reason is that they have such exceptional airflow relative to their power output. The heads will support way more power than they're making. Same thing with an LS3 is a similar situation, where it's a motor that's rated at 430 horsepower, but it has enough cylinder head to support 200 more horsepower. So you probably could get away with more on that motor because of the head flow than you could with other motors, where, for instance, a fuel-y headed small block Chevy, flows 200 or so. And so it just doesn't have, it gets pretty easily, choked up with the nitrous and the fuel trying to get through the port, and displaces a lot of the airflow. So that kind of thing can become problematic. But by and large, for most of these setups, guys running nitrous on stuff, for 90% or more of the people, you can just add nitrous to whatever you have. You got a stock cam, a small cam, a truck cam, the truck Norris cam, the bigger, wilder camshafts, all of those, all the way up to whatever would fit in an LS, or whatever would fit in a tune port, whatever available piston to valve clearance you have. And then if you go with an even bigger cam, because if you got valve release in your pistons, all of that stuff will work. And whatever you have, whatever curve your NA motor generates, nitrous will just go whoop, just jump up and add to that. So for the vast majority of people, that's the case, like 9-1 in favor of it just adding the power. So let's see how many people have actually run nitrous on there. Have you ever run nitrous on any motor? Nitrous. Wow. I remember the first time I ran nitrous in an old 77 Camaro. And It was a one-legged rear end, and it was on a carbureted small block. Not a particularly stellar one, but it had a 273 and a turbo 350 trans with a shift kit in it. You could chirp that second gear, you know. I remember putting the nitrous on it and just and we didn't do this was not tuning. This is just the OG way. We just put it on and went out and filled the bottle, put the kit on and went out and just nailed it. And we did retard the timing and then see what happens. We don't know what the air fuel was. We don't know, but the nice thing about, especially this was years ago, this was an actual NOS kit from back in the day. But the kit worked very well. In fact, I had it sitting for a really, really long time and never put it on. I'm finally just sitting there one time with my buddy Harold, and I'm like, dude, we need to put this. Let's put this nitrous on this motor. We got to do it. And so we did. We got the bottle filled, and then we went out. And even with the 273 gear, just laid into the nitrous, it was just murder that one tire, that poor single tire. It would just, you know, it would just do burnouts for days, just a one wheel peel. But for, you know, the length of a block, it was ridiculous. So obviously the air fuel is pretty close. And what I was going to say is the nice thing about the, certainly even more so, I think the older kits, is that they were way on the safe side in terms of fueling. They had, in most cases, they had way too much fuel. We used to do testing with them and we used to strip a bunch of fuel jet out of it. Or you alternately could just add nitrous jet to the amount of fuel that they were already supplying, because that's what they wanted, right? That's a better way to go. And we've adjusted it that way too. And that also works pretty well. Let's see what guys got going on. James, G-Dub, Turbo Sentra, Old School Dragster, Stevie YouTube, Tom McCook. Hey, I have a plate system, but I've never hooked that up. NOS kit, a video would be cool for my carb. I have lots of carb nitrous videos up. Lots of plate setups. Curious if anyone has used a dial a boost on a Holley powered setup. I'm trying to have adjustable PSI settings on my swap, but not finding much information on the setup of the MAC valve. There are hookups for the 3-port and 4-port setups online, because I always have to look that up whenever I'm setting up our TC1 stuff, which I'm not going to be using anymore. Probably will use the Holley to control as the boost controller. And if I do that, I'll make sure I include it in the video to help steer you in the right direction. Is nitrous harder on internals and turbos or blowers because the instant power jump? I think that it is. I think that the potential, especially as you go up in power, you can go way farther safer with boost than you can with nitrous. Turbo Sentra, I finished the new bass tune. I had injectors of the dead time wrong. Okay. That's got TPI at 85, aluminum heads in 86. Only aluminum heads in 86 on the convertibles, and then an 87 on all of them. Help, what will gum up a carburetor in 2 weeks with black undercoating type stuff? Is it carbon coming back from an open valve or something? Or did it draw in the gasket? Otherwise, nothing in the fuel. Burn fuel will leave residue, like backfires and stuff. Carbon deposits from burnt valves will do that. Drawing something in the intake manifold. Rubber fuel lines are degrading. Oh, that's a good call. Is there no filter on the line in between the carburetor? Usually the carburetors at least have those stone filters that everybody takes out. Yeah, check the Stormy. That's a good call on Lake Customs. Check the inside of the fuel line. TPI does work with nitrous. I used to run a Sneaky Pete system plumbed under the intake into the runners. Used to smack on 5-point slows all the time. Wow, just hating on the Mustangs. Ran a 50 shot on a 100 horsepower car and lost 20 horsepower on a spark plug. We've run 75 shots on 50 and 75 shots on Hondas, on B series Hondas a lot. $25 shot on a go-kart, that would be cool. Never ran nitrous, but I rode in a couple cars with nitrous, one 408 Duster and W2 heads, and an FDRX7 with stock turbos. The nitrous in turbos works really good, especially if they're big turbos and they were soft before. Once you add nitrous, they're not soft turbos anymore. Just got rid of a TPI setup in my iRock. We'll be going to an LS2. That will make more power. How hard would it be to achieve 700 wheel horsepower? It's not hard at all with boost. 700 wheel horsepower is not going to happen NA. On my 208 GT500, I had hidden nozzles in the lower part of the elbow to the blower to knock off a second of my ET. I used the small jets. Helped more than they said it would, but I was nervous about distribution. Less of a problem with distribution, maybe with the blower. I think that would be better, actually. And I've run it on, we ran nitrous on the inlet after the throttle body on an 03 Cobra too. In fact, this same setup that we ran on the exact same setup that we ran on this tune port motor, we ran that same fogger nozzle and stuff and just drilled into the elbows, an AccuFab elbow and then a big throttle body on the stock Eaton supercharger. Yes, Andy, you did run nitrous on a 351M. Very cool. 79 Bronco, Holy Street Dominator and long tubes. Some mud bogging truck. Never checked air fuel. Surprised it held together. Most of the time it was fogging back out the carburetor. Yeah, that's not good. Before putting the F2 Pro Charger on my 427, I ran a small shot of nitrous and ran 950s at 143. Nice. Nitrous helps a lot. I ran it on road race tracks. I ran it on oval tracks. I ran it on lots of stuff. How much nitrous? Just run all of it. I have done that before where we just took the jet out on the perimeter plate setup on the junkyard LS. We did that. It still flowed the same as like 100 jet or 102 jet, which was the biggest one that we could find. Buying a Trailblazer SS LS2. That's a good motor. You'll be happy with that. Even in stock trim compared to a tune port motor, it would be up 460. It'd be up 150 horsepower or more. Can I run a 799 with a sloppy stage 2 on an L96 as a daily driven truck? Yes, you can. You'll probably want a different than stock converter in that, though. I wonder how safe a 15 shot would be on a 600cc motorcycle. Do they have jetting that small? One of the problems with going down to very small jetting is that the flow orifice becomes so small that it can kind of freeze itself shut and stop flowing. Nitrous is very cold. You can get some buildup, and it's pretty easy to clog a really small hole. Have you ever run nitrous? Most of the people saying no. 62% are saying no, I have not run nitrous. Come on, even on your BTR truck North Cam. I get so many comments and requests for, I want a truck North Cam for my whatever, for my L93 or L83 for every other combination. Why don't they make one for a Hemi or whatever? Trying to find one for my second gen Camaro just to play around with the junk motor. That's it. Rick, you need a tune port setup? There might be one down at West Tech. think for the most part, the TPI vet had plenty of torque. Yeah, it had, they made like 100 more foot-pounds than they made horsepower. So they did pretty good. Texas Speed has a chopper copper cam for the Hemis. Yeah, there's lots of good Hemi cams out now. BTR just came out with a bunch of them. And I think that Summit has them now, and Texas Speed has them. But who has the best cam? The best Hemi cam. Richard, do you think adding an exit cone or deflector to a turbo exducer? So you want to taper the outlet of the exit of the turbo? Would help with an integrated wastegate turbo. Improving the flow rate of the turbo is always good. Usually it doesn't improve wastegate flow, because usually the wastegate flow is not a function of a restriction in the tubing after the turbo. Usually the wastegate flow on a internal wastegate, the flow is dictated by the flow orifice, the internal flow orifice, the little valve that's in there. So you could improve the flow rate of the turbo, which is good. But if you did that, it actually might make life harder on the wastegate to control the boost. We've done lots of stuff with porting that flow orifice. A lot of times the problem is you can only go so big, because the valve that they have is just like a swing valve. Normally it just opens and closes, and that it needs a sealing surface to seal against. And so you can't go so that the valve is uncovered, basically. Otherwise there's no wastegate action. TPI would have been a good truck intake manifold. I agree. We talked about that many times. The torque of that thing it was perfect for a truck. I think they missed the boat on that. I don't know that might have been a cost issue. I'm sure that's why they did it. I'm sure a tune port setup was way more money than a throttle body injection or a simple carburetor. Still 2/3 of the people, 66%, saying no on the nitrous. You guys need to go out and get nitrous on something. TPI intake on a small turbo. Yep, I run turbos on tune port stuff, and it does the same thing. It does the same thing that nitrous does. It makes a jillion foot-pounds of torque, and then adds a percentage of horsepower and a percentage of torque, and the torque number is a lot bigger. So the gain that you get as a percentage is a lot bigger. I think on my DIY Callaway kit that I did with Jimmy and Nathan from HP Performance, that thing made a lot of torque. I think it made 600 foot-pounds or something. It was all the torques bits. And TPI 400, yeah, that would make peak power at 3,800 or something. That's a situation where I think that on a 400 with a decent cylinder head and a mild camshaft, that I think that the tune port setup would make more torque if we had bigger tubes on it and more intake flow. I think it wouldn't make less torque. I think it would make more. My injector dead time was 1.2 at 12 volts and 0.85 at 14.5 volts. The data sheet said 0.45 at 13. You should be able to, can you do a resistance check, turbo center, on the injectors? thinking more about the exhaust flow through the exducer. The wastegate would still be using about 40% of the exhaust exit. So maybe I'm not picturing what you're talking about. Tom, did all of that top secret stuff go out? Top secret. Rick Thomas, it's not a complete system. It's not an ECM. It's not a harness. There might be stock injectors there, but no, it's not a takeoff tune port motor or partial motor. It's just the tune port stuff that we ran on the dyno. Okay, cool, Tom. I'll have to go down there. I'm going down, down, down. I need to run the 400. I have a 400 small block down there that I need to put on. One of the problems I found when I was down there with the small block is that the pan I got is for a dual. It has provisions for a block that has the dipsticks on both sides, and so I just need it for one side. The reason I was asking so many gains related questions for a 5.3 with the Choppa Carbo last night was because the setup you ran your video with the L33 and have an LM7. Yeah, that's a good cam for that motor. I know that I've already ruined one of the tune port setups by welding a carburetor flange on top of it. I didn't weld it. I had one welded so we could run a carburetor on it, because it makes big power, right? That didn't work out very well, I don't think. Carbureted tune port, because then you get all the fuel cooling too, just with none of the distribution. Sean, yeah, you're not going to be shifting under nitrous, so for a single gear thing, it would be fine. Rick, I don't know. I'll have to see what's even there. I won't know until I go down there and find out. I know that I think that there was at least one that we ran down there. They might have they're throwing a bunch of stuff away. The exducer's offset to the housing exit. Let me just try it and watch the wastegate. Okay. I mean, doesn't the wastegate exit into the discharge from the exducer? It doesn't have a separate outlet, right? Think about having a supplementary half-gallon fuel tank feeding C16 with the nitrous is going. A lot of guys do that. That works. Save the old school stuff. Yep. I don't know. I don't know what. It's not mine. It belongs to the guys at West Tech, so I would have to ask them. All I did was be the only person to test it in the 20 years or whatever that they probably had that. I don't remember anybody else ever running tune board stuff, just like modular Ford stuff. Richard will run it. He likes all that silly stuff. Queensland, what's going on? How much does nitrous cost in the US and Australia? It's 12 AU a pound. I don't know. Does anybody know what the fill rate is for nitrous? The guys at West Tech have the big fill bottles in the station there. So I don't know what the pound per pound cost is. Running a 75 shot of my NA Bear. That's cool. Certainly can notice it, I would think. Yeah. Heading to the quarter mile in 2 weeks, taking extra jets to do 125 shot. You should. That's a nice thing about nitrous and boost too. You can, if we ran 10 pounds, let's run 12 pounds or 15 pounds or 30 pounds. And nitrous is the same way. Just leave the big jets at home. Only like 75 is fine, 100 is fine, 125. Or in your case, yeah, just to leave the 250s and the 300s at home. I decided to cut my gas in my 49cc two-stroke with diesel. It did not work well. No separate outlet, one large exit hole with the wastegate blowing across the exducer hole. So the exducer and wastegate are each two opposite sides. Yeah, normally they merge together and they both go out the same exit. Are you wanting to put a divider in between there or something? Always been leery of Nos just because it's not so set it and forget it. You need to try it. It is really cool. I mean, I like boost, obviously. Cost me $180 to fill my 10-pound bottle, but I live in country Australia and there's only one guy in town that fills them. Okay. I was just wondering if a divider or going for a full cone would work better. Where's the cone going to be? Is the cone going to be inside or is it going to be on the after the turbo? Got the truck running yesterday. Two needs a lot of work and won't idle. Motorvating. It's like motorboating. I tore down a piano for scrap yesterday. It's an awful time, but there was steel rod in there, good for exhaust hangers. Total loss. All right, Sean, we'll see you later. Nitrous. Bye. You can certainly hear it on the dyno. You can hear the motor get happy when you hit the nitrous. It's like when the thing comes on boost too. It sounds nice. So Rick, did you find a tune port setup? Where are we at? Still 65% saying no. Make a cam recommendation for a 350 or 400 small block tune port engine for a. Those two would be a little bit different, maybe. And is it are they stock motors or what? And what are you trying to do with them? Is it a stock converter and all that? I'll just pick a mild something or other. And is it the 350 could be a hydraulic roller. The 400 is definitely not going to be, unless you wanted to do a retrofit. Retrofit hydraulic roller. Let's see. Let's go back and look at some tune port cams. Extreme Energy flat tappet cams. So in the Comp Cams catalog, I think I would go with an XC262 maybe. And 400, you might go with an XC268. So those are like 218, 224, or 224, 230. But a 262 looks pretty good. Extreme Energy computer controlled cams. Yeah, still, yeah, still 262s. 262 or 268. They have a 268 version, which is a 224, 230, 477, 480, 114. Oh, so the normal extreme energies are 110 degree LSA. The other computer controlled ones are 114 for the 262 and 268. I don't know. Are you running it carbureted or are you running it with fuel injection? Inside, there's a partial malformed cone out of the exducer that and flow hump that's not really necessary with the upgraded downpipes. Okay. I went with Howard's cam and my built TPI. I was just looking, and when I give you a cam recommendation, like from that catalog, if you look at those duration numbers, you can anybody that makes the cams can do that. Once around, you're welcome. Yeah, it doesn't just have to be that. That's just the book that I have immediate access to. Have you ever run nitrous on any motor? Oh, we're sneaking up a little bit. A little 38% are yes now. Not quite 3/4 or 2/3. They did it with a tune port, a TBSS. Let's see. Put nitrous on my 06 GTO. Let's just say the 4L60 didn't like it. Yeah, they do not like shifting under power like that. That's where you ask it to shift into the zone where all of the neutrals exist. Shift into the neutral zone. If you're a comic book guy, you know what that is. Neutral zone, I guess, would be Star Trek more. The negative zone would be comic books. Got to get my pop culture right. I'm excited about the 400. I'm excited about lots of stuff right now. there's so much juggling going on. So many things I'm working on that I want to get right. Yep, 6 neutrals is not good. It's the between gears position. It's not ideal. Yeah, Rick, that's the problem with having a new vehicle. Not a problem. Not like I wouldn't want to have that problem. But with a new vehicle, you have to make that decision. Should I modify it and take a chance on voiding the warranty? Star Trek had a comic book that crossed over into Marvel, I believe. That would be cool. There's never enough 7 of 9. Never enough Borg assimilation. Any suggestions for force induction on my 96 F-150? Yeah, on a 302, put a GT45 on it. GT45 turbo. Or you could put a kit on a kit, you know, a Pro Charger or a Torque Storm, or if they have that Vortec. Run 225 horsepower wet kit in 2 stages on my Fox. I remember a guy when I was way back when I was working at a place called Mustang Dynamics. When I had my Mustang, it was just down the street from the guys at Saline, because they had a shop over here that was in, I think it was in Placentia. And a guy came in and brought the remains of his cylinder heads and his intake manifold and stuff, because he had a fogger set up underneath the factory 5-liter, you know, upper. It was tucked underneath, but it was a individual port fogger setup, and he was running like a 250 shot or 225 or 250 shot on it. And he said he won a lot of races in it, but when he came in, you could set his heads on the on a flat surface and you could see they had a bow to them. That seems like a lot of power to try to run on it did have ported heads. They were ported stock heads, and it had some kind of cam in it too. And I think they had a ported factory upper and lower manifold, not extrude honed, but done by hand. So I don't know how much that helped, but it was not good. Any tips on replacing an 06 Monte Carlo 5.3 or LS4 belt tensioner? Doesn't LS4 King have stuff up on Facebook or for stuff like that? I've never even looked at one of those, so I would be the wrong guy to ask about the tensioner. But normally the LS tensioners bolt on in 3 spots, and so you just unbolt them and then put a new one on there. The LS5 King, is that one better? To run a turbo, should I keep the EFI? That's what we do. We run it with EFI. That way you can make sure that all cylinders have the right amount of fuel. It's a little harder to do with a carb. We've also run blow through carb stuff on 302s. But you can tune, I don't know about a 96. Somebody else might know if they still have programming for the factory Ford computers. But you can just put a turbo and blow through the factory intake manifold and heads and all that. I want you to spray a small 50 horsepower shot with boost to see how much it picks up from charge cooling. It doesn't pick up from charge cooling. The charge cooling effect, especially on a 50 shot, is almost nothing. I have a video up already where we ran nitrous as the intercooler. So we ran it intercooled, then we ran it non-intercooled with trying to use nitrous as the intercooler, but it only changed the temperature by about 30 degrees or so. It's not very much. The problem is there's not enough nitrous. I mean, it's very, very cold, but like we had 800 horsepower worth of hot air and you have 100 horsepower worth of the cold stuff, it's not enough to offset all of the hot stuff. So that's the problem. It does, however, pick up a lot of power though, but not because of charge cooling. It picks up a lot of power because it's nitrous and has lots of extra oxygen molecules. Just get a bonnet for it. I'm running that on my Dodge Dakota 3.9 liter with turbo. Current plan is GT40 or P heads, cam, and RPM to intake. Okay, that's good. That's all good stuff. 10 to 20 bucks in the USA a pound. Average cost to refill and how well they do it varies. Cool. Cool. into the Ollie guys right now about running the V10 on the dyno, the 6.8 liter. Still trying to find a set of stage 1 cams for the J35. All I can find are stage 2s, and I doubt I can get a converter to support a stage 2, but I'll look. Mostly street driving. Are people making they have to have converters for those, right? Although are the guys that are running J series, are they running them with automatics? I love my P heads. They seem a little lighter than the E7s. I set mine up for thermactor air to cylinders 4 and 8. Nitrous used to be cheap power nowadays. Yeah, with the filling and that's a pretty high cost. Everything should be $1 a gallon. Fuel, gas at the gas station should be $1 a gallon because it's just easy to calculate. And nitrous should be $1 a gallon too. What's the difference between a blow-through turbo setup and any other? Nothing. A blow-through turbo setup for a carburetor, if that's what you're talking about, has to have a blow-through carburetor. But it also does if you have a blow-through using a centrifugal supercharger. Yeah, that's Michael's right. You can have your stock cam reground. I know the guys from Schneider do that. I'm not sure if many people are maybe in the sport models, but it's the same as mine, except for the sport models have paddle shifting. Yeah. Bing, 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 bing. Doing Formula One racing. My buddy Jimmy put cams in his. His is a J35 also in the NSX. Blow-through doesn't seem to be as desirable. I personally would rather have an EFI one, especially if I'm driving it on the street. I know Kevin will give me a hard time from CSU about the drivability of a blow-through carbureted deal, but I don't see how it could match like EFI for drivability on the street. It does make good power though. So we're going to go ahead and close out our poll at 62%. We're going to end our poll. 62% no. We want to see more yeses on that. You guys need to get nitrous in your life. What's a good size injector upgrade for a 5.3 from stock injectors? It depends on how much power you want to make. You need to have the injector size for the power level. Most guys put 80s in them because then that gives you room to grow. And then you're in an injector upgrade anyway, you're going to have to retune it. So you might as well retune it and give yourself some room. Is there a rear-wheel drive application for the J series? Well, Jimmy has one in the NSX. Does that count as rear-wheel drive? And what about the trucks and stuff? And what are the elements and stuff? What else has the J series in it? Are any of those rear-wheel drive? Honda never made a rear-wheel drive J series. Okay. Made an all-wheel drive. Element is K series. Okay. See how much I need to learn? Weather Tech. Marketing influencer. That's funny. J series and an E46 might be fun. Yep. Is it the newer NSX? No, it's a 91. But it's making like probably 750 at the tire right now. Closest is all-wheel drive like the Saturn Vue. Is the all-wheel drive still transverse mounted? Josh, all of that stuff that you're talking about is up to you. Maybe someone has adapted a CD009 or something as a kit. 89 Mustang GT heads cam intake with a nitrous dry kit back in 2001. Best total timing for heads cam and a truck Norris cam, or heads and a truck Norris cam. Almost every LS I've ever tested on the engine dyno when we run it cold makes best power at 29 degrees. Most of the guys with it in the car running hotter don't run quite that much timing. For the J series, is an M90 supercharger adapter available? There was one. Do they still have it? Dylan, yeah, this NSX has a J swap in it instead of the C30 that was originally in it. They drag raced the C30 also, but it got hurt. And rather than try to find an expensive other J30, which he did, but the 3.5 liter is a better way to go because it's a stroker version, basically. Because then it, and he's still running it to, I think he's running that thing to 8,000. I don't know about any of that, Josh. We don't get involved in any of that stuff, running things on the engine dyno. So Dylan, they still offer it? I thought that they discontinued that, but that's cool if they still have it. Two more minutes. 5.3 with a power glide. I don't. You have to tell me what you're trying to do with it. The transmission's not really going to be an issue unless you're. Are you using? Why are you using a power glide? Are you using a power glide because you're drag racing it and you need to make 1,000,000 horsepower or something? A J swap Civic would be definitely cool. It's like a big block Civic, right? Had a 92 custom modified 12-second V8 5-liter HO Ford Mustang GT in 2008. Just a little racing. So tell me what the power level is and what else is done to the 5.3. And give me some gear ratios or some car vehicle weights or what kind of power you want to make with it. We can give you an idea on the combination to make that power. I have lots of videos up to go from on an NA motor to go from 350, which is about what they make stock, the way that we run them, up to up to 550 and everywhere in between. So you can just kind of pick the combination that you want. A power glide with 488 gears would be different than a power glide with 308 gears. Is it a cruiser or a bruiser? We got 1 more minute. Personally stoked. I got 2 of my dream engines, 5.7 Hemi and a J35. That's cool. I like both of those. And I don't have either one of those right now. Mass airflow meter versus speed density calibration, ease at 18 inches of idle vacuum. If you have 18 inches of idle vacuum, either one of them should work. That should be enough for even for a speed density, especially if you have the ability to tune it. Jason's got how much core volume? You mean what size should your intercooler be? You just need 1,000 horsepower intercooler core. That's easy to find. There's lots of those. What's a decent build for a 5.3? James, we already went over that, man. Just put a cam in it. $3,800 supercharge on a Toyota Camry. Yes. You want your truck back on the street? You feeling okay, Todd? How hard is it to get the 500 horsepower out of a 6-liter? It's not hard at all. That's a 6-liter, even a stock one with the right cam in it, could be near 500. I have 2 327s, 396s, and a half dozen 454s. Nice. What do you think of hollow racing camshafts? Gun drill cams have been around for a really, really long time. It does take weight out, but it takes weight out of the center of the camshaft, the center of the rotation. So the gains from that are not dramatic. Idle vacuum value where the mass airflow is easier to calibrate. I don't know. I don't have a number for you. I don't know what that breakaway number is. Oh, Dan, you have a de-stroked 300. Well, that will help because that kind of artificially improves the head flow, which those things don't have a lot of. They do not have a bunch. I was watching the one from Power Nation when they did their upgrades on theirs, and then they ran a turbo on it, and you get an idea, or at least this should give you an idea for most people, when the motor makes more torque than it does horsepower NA, then you know something is restrictive. It could be a couple of things. It could be the heads, the cam, or the intake. Usually it's cylinder head flow, but can also be very, very mild cam timing. They put a cam in it, but it wasn't real big. So if you get the motor to make it, for the thing to have a fairly high specific output, it needs to make more horsepower than torque. That's what will happen. Those two things, like you make a lot of torque and less horsepower, that's like a tune port motor. And then they're the same. That's like a hot street kind of small block where it's making near 400, like a 350, making 400 horsepower and 400 foot-pounds. And then you start to go away from that, and it's making still 400 foot-pounds, but it's making 450 or 500 horsepower. And all it did was just shift everything out higher in the RPM range. That kind of gives you a guide on how wild, relatively speaking, the combination is. Tom, I'll give you a call after you get off. 240 head on the 300 is a ticket. Does a 240 head flow more? The geometry of the 300 isn't exactly geared toward RPM. It's essentially a stroker motor. If you look at it in terms of it being a 6-cylinder with a bore and stroke compared to a, if you had a V8 that would had that bore and stroke, it'd be near 400 inches. Right? Am I right about that? I think I am. Yeah. It would be right near 300, right near 400 inches. Todd, it's just all in the it's all in the lighting. How much power added would a 200 shot? If you're adding a 200 shot of nitrous, it'll add 200 horsepower. 240 head has just slightly smaller chambers, probably the same flow. So that's just going to add power from compression, but not head flow. And that's the thing that it really needs. I hate to ask questions. No, Josh, you that's why you're here, man. This is a Q&A session right now. The idea of it is to ask questions. Ryan, could upper lower plate kit be used for meth instead? So you want to inject water methanol in a nitrous plate? Is that what you're asking? You need those lights. We all do. See, this is the here's the youth light. Huh. See, it made you into a puppy, huh? Oh, are you telling me that it's time to eat? Come on outside. Come on. Hello. Look, who's that? Who is that? That's Bruno, huh? That is Bruno. Has somebody been licking your ears because they're all wet? What are you doing? Are you telling me it's noon and it's time to go eat? Is that what you want? Do you want to eat? Is it food time? Okay. See, they come remind me. It's noon. It's time to get off. And on that note, it is time to go, but I will be back tonight at 7 o'clock, for the norm. I'll see you guys all tonight.